At 3:04 a.m., the heading is steady. A Russian-Chinese convoy is cutting through the fragile Arctic ice under cover of darkness, engines thundering as the vessels push far beyond safe speed. On the U.S. radar screen, the gap is shrinking second by second. Beep, beep, beep. One signal appears, then 3, then 7. Within moments, the screen turns into a dense field of fast-moving contacts headed directly toward them. Warning sirens erupt across the bridge, sharp and relentless. Distance, 18 miles, 17, 16. No radio reply, no course correction, no sign of slowing. The Arctic is no longer an empty frozen frontier. It has become a trillion-dollar strategic prize. After Moscow's decree declaring the northern sea route part of its internal waters, the Bering Strait has turned into one of the most sensitive pressure points on the planet. And this is not an isolated moment. Moscow and Beijing have been steadily increasing their presence near Alaska, testing American reaction times and raising the pressure with every move. At 3:07 a.m., U.S. radar detects what looks like a moving wall of steel. At the front is the Ivan Papanin, Russia's newest heavily equipped icebreaker, fitted with advanced long-range systems. Around it move Russian and Chinese destroyers, while a specialized reconnaissance vessel slips through the electronic shadow of massive gas carriers. Its antennas are active, quietly collecting sensitive data from the surrounding area. At 3:08 a.m., one thing becomes clear. This fleet is not trying to hide. Instead, it begins gaining speed through ice-choked waters where even a small mistake could have serious consequences. The radio remains silent. No explanation, no warning, no attempt to adjust course. They are driving straight across the bow of the U.S. task force, creating a collision course with only 90 seconds left. General Quarters. General Quarters! The alert tears through every deck of the American ships. Inside a patrol aircraft cockpit, the pilot grips the controls, pulse rising as the situation unfolds in real time. In the dim glow of the sonar room, an operator speaks in a low, tense voice. Contact. Bearing 090. Closing at extreme speed. Everyone on board understands the same thing at once. This is no longer a routine exercise. Is it a major navigation failure or a carefully planned move designed to force a reaction? At 3:10 a.m., the Pentagon's invisible network tightens around the strait like a steel net. Rather than relying only on distant satellites, the U.S. task force activates an integrated multi-domain defense system at the edge of the Arctic. High-speed processors inside the Combat Information Center begin merging data from every available source: thermal sensors, electronic signals, acoustic readings, and radar tracks. In seconds, the pitch-black waters of the Bering Strait are transformed into a crystal-clear digital battle space. Every movement of the Russian-Chinese convoy is mapped, tracked, and analyzed. What was hidden in the darkness is now visible. They were no longer vague signals in the dark. They had become precise coordinates, locked onto the display and followed in real time. At 3:12 a.m., the frozen silence around Eielson Air Force Base was broken in an instant. What had begun as the Arctic Edge exercise now shifted into a live high-stakes response. Two F-35A Lightning IIs lifted off the runway, their F-135 engines glowing against the polar night. Close behind them came Skywatcher, the E-2D Advanced Hawkeye, rising into the darkness like the eye of the entire operation. As the aircraft pushed through the cold air at Mach 1.2, the sound rolled across the ice field, sending a clear message. America's northern shield was now in motion. At 3:15 a.m., inside the E-2D, the mission commander brought the AN/APY-9A ESA radar online. This was more than a search sweep. It was a deep scan of the sky, using powerful UHF waves to cut through layers of interference and deception. In one focused 8-second sweep, the radar pushed through Russia's dense electronic cover. The tactical display sharpened with unsettling clarity. 150 miles away, a formation of Su-35 fighters appeared on screen. They were flying high-altitude escort for something larger, slower, and far more important. The target had just departed Anadyr Air Base and was moving directly toward the unfolding standoff. Seconds later, the system began connecting the pieces. A concerning pattern appeared on the display. This aircraft was not moving in for a direct aerial confrontation. Its purpose seemed different. It was heading toward the area to influence what was happening below the surface of the sea. At 3:17 a.m., the F-35s maintained complete electronic silence. Using their stealth profile, they became nearly invisible to Russian radar, moving like shadows through the Arctic sky. While the opposing pilots saw nothing, the F-35's APG-81 radar quietly tracked every aircraft in the formation. Through the MADL data link, the F-35s shared their full picture with the entire task force, creating a seamless coordination network across air, sea, and command units. But the pressure of being watched by something they could not see began to affect the Russian pilots. The Su-35s broke formation and switched their radars into active search mode, scanning aggressively for the unseen aircraft. That choice changed everything. By turning on their radars, they revealed their exact positions, feeding fresh data straight into the sensor network the US force had already positioned around them. At 3:20 a.m., Russia moved into its Maskirovka play. On board the Ivan Papanin, the Krasuka 4 electronic warfare system was pushed to full power. At the same time, a Chinese Type 052D destroyer activated its own wideband interference systems. Together, the two platforms formed a dense electronic wall aimed directly at US data link frequencies. The effect was immediate. Inside the F-35 cockpit, the target display flickered, distorted, and then faded to black. The Link 16 network, one of the key channels of modern U.S. coordination, was suddenly overwhelmed by a flood of white noise. On board the E-2D, the mission commander watched the clean tactical picture collapse into broken lines and static. Without hesitation, he reached for the emergency analog radio. "All units, we've lost visibility. Repeat, the data link has been compromised." At 3:22 a.m., the danger was no longer limited to screens and signals. The situation outside had become just as tense. The Russian-Chinese fleet moved quickly to take advantage of the confusion, closing the distance to only 12 miles. In the ice-filled Bering Strait, 12 miles is almost nothing. The U.S. task force was now operating without its full digital picture, trapped inside a 47-second crisis window where one wrong turn could lead to a collision, a serious miscalculation, or an incident no one could easily pull back from. At 3:24 a.m., the U.S. Navy proved it had not been depending on luck. The EA-18G Growler Squadron, already on standby near the exercise zone, was immediately redirected from Eielson Air Force Base. The Growler is built for a different kind of battlefield, one fought across the electromagnetic spectrum. Within minutes, the aircraft reached hotspot 328A and began focusing powerful electronic beams onto the frequencies used by the Russian Krasuka 4 system, aboard the Ivan Papanin and the radar networks of the Chinese ships. The interference began to break apart. Within 60 seconds, the data link came back online. Tactical screens lit up again. The confusion cleared, revealing a Russian-Chinese formation that had pushed too far forward and was now fully exposed to a restored American command network. At 3:30 a.m., regaining the data link looked like a major turning point. But the Kremlin still had another card hidden beneath the Arctic ice. For hours, a Kilo-class submarine, often nicknamed the Oceanic Black Hole because of how difficult it can be to detect, had been waiting below the surface. But the Arctic is unforgiving. The extreme cold had drained its batteries to a critical level. To keep its systems running and prepare for its next move, the submarine was forced to raise its snorkel toward the surface to take in air and recharge. Deep below, the low rumble of diesel engines began spreading through the water, creating a new and highly concerning sonar contact near the U.S. fleet. At 3:32 a.m., the Ivan Papanin realized the electronic deception had failed and shifted to a more physical maneuver. The armed icebreaker pushed its 9,000-ton hull to the limit. It was no longer simply blocking the route, it was creating cover. Its massive propellers tore through the icy water, throwing waves and turbulence into every direction. The result was a thick curtain of noise designed to hide the engine signature of the Kilo-class submarine beneath it. To U.S. sonar operators, the submarine's sound pattern began blending with the chaos created by the icebreaker above. At 3:35 a.m., the pressure expanded into the sky. A Russian Tu-142 Bear aircraft launched from Anadyr Air Base and refueled in flight came in at an extremely low altitude. It began releasing a chain of decoys across the Bering Strait. These devices were programmed to imitate the acoustic signatures of multiple Russian submarines at the same time. On U.S. sonar screens, the seafloor suddenly seemed crowded with false contacts. Dozens of ghost-like signals appeared at once, each one demanding attention. It was a storm of misinformation designed to overwhelm the crew and fracture their decision-making. At 3:38 a.m., the clock started running down. Intelligence estimates suggested the Kilo-class submarine had only 3 minutes left before completing its underwater launch sequence. The commander now had just 47 seconds to choose the next move. A wrong decision could trigger a collision, a direct confrontation, or an escalation that neither side could fully control. At 3:40 a.m., the U.S. Navy refused to chase shadows. Instead, it went hunting for facts. On command, the entire task force switched into submarine tracking mode. A P-8 Poseidon, one of the most advanced maritime patrol aircraft in the world, took the lead. The crew understood that the sea surface was too unstable for ordinary sonar methods, so they changed tactics. They activated high-resolution surface radar, not listening for sound, but searching for physical evidence. They scanned the water for tiny, unnatural patterns, narrow trails, broken ripples, and subtle surface marks that could reveal the snorkel of the Kilo-class submarine moving beneath the ice. At 3:41 a.m., the P-8's multispectral sensors began sampling the freezing Arctic air. In that untouched Arctic environment, even the faintest trace of diesel exhaust stood out like a bright signal in the dark. The sensors detected hydrocarbon molecules in the freezing air, a chemical fingerprint the Russian submarine could not hide, distort, or block. Between the subtle wake on the radar and the chemical trail drifting above the water, the so-called oceanic black hole suddenly appeared on U.S. screens with remarkable precision. The P-8 Poseidon had traced its final movement beneath the ice. But the decisive move did not come from the aircraft above. From the edge of the operating zone, an MH-60R Seahawk helicopter swept in at extremely low altitude, placing passive sensors across the last remaining escape corridor. There was no space left to slip away, and no electronic cover strong enough to protect it. The entire stretch of water was now wrapped inside an invisible net that tightened with every second. In that moment, the oceanic black hole was forced out of hiding, not because it had made a mistake, but because every possible route had been closed. The Russian captain had only one option: dive deeper, shut down the engines, and move away in 70 seconds of absolute silence, trying to escape before the net fully closed. At 3:44 a.m., with the underwater threat temporarily contained, the battlefield changed direction instantly. EA-18G Growler aircraft turned their electronic pressure toward the Ivan Papanin, overwhelming its navigation and positioning systems with focused interference. Within seconds, the advantage shifted completely. The same Arctic waters that had given Moscow cover now became an open, controlled space with nowhere left to hide. At the same time, the F-35 squadron dropped low and passed near the opposing command ship at Mach 1.1. The shockwave rattled the vessel and left the crew disoriented. The 9,000-ton icebreaker, now struggling with limited awareness and disrupted systems, was forced to slow almost to a crawl to avoid the surrounding ice. At 3:46 a.m., Moscow's plan began to fall apart. The Tu-142 lost contact with both the submarine and the command vessel. In less than 2 minutes, the entire Russian-Chinese formation had lost coordination. The pincer movement was broken, leaving the fleet exposed as the U.S. task force restored its position and control over the area. At 3:55 a.m., the ice itself seemed to cry out as the final surprise was revealed. Just 500 yards from the Russian icebreaker, nearly 1 meter of Arctic ice cracked open. A dark steel command tower rose through the frozen surface. It was the USS Delaware, a Virginia-class advanced undersea vessel. Fresh from Operation Ice Camp Boarfish 2026, it had been moving silently beneath the ice the entire time. That was the reality Moscow had failed to see. While Russian forces were chasing false signals, decoys, and electronic shadows, the Delaware had already been positioned directly beneath the operating zone. In a real confrontation, the Russian fleet would have had no time to react before understanding what was happening. They had been exposed for 20 minutes. They just didn't know it. Every layer of Moscow's plan had failed. The noise curtain from the icebreaker, the submarine's snorkel signature, and the false signals dropped by the Tu-142. None of it could overcome America's ability to operate unseen. Facing pressure from F-35s above and the unseen undersea presence below, the Russian-Chinese fleet realized it had no favorable path forward. With no practical option left, the formation turned away and withdrew, describing the move as part of a planned exercise to preserve its image. But what if Russia had refused to back down? Then the USS Delaware could have released ultra-small unmanned underwater vehicles, silent robotic scouts designed to attach themselves to the hulls of opposing ships. Instead of an open confrontation, Moscow would have faced something far more unsettling: a hidden technological shadow tracking the movement of its northern fleet for years without being noticed. That is the truly unsettling part. Not noise, not force, not open confrontation. An invisible presence already inside the heart of the fleet. And by the time Moscow understood the game, it had already lost.